and get this evening's event started. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Naval War College Foundation's 6th Newport Lecture Series presentation of the 2021 to 2022 academic year, Cognitive Warfare in the 21st Century, Artificial Intelligence and the Human Domain. I'm George Lang, CEO of the Naval War College Foundation, and it is my pleasure to welcome you this evening to our speaker series. I also wish to thank Chairman Bilden, our esteemed Board of Trustees, members, friends, and sponsors, as well as my hardworking staff for their continued support and commitment to the rewarding missions of the U.S. Naval War College and Naval War College Foundation. Enabled by our very generous foundation members, friends, and sponsors, including many of you, the U.S. Naval War College has continued its innovative, cutting-edge education and research scholarship and wargaming programs that have sustained it as America's premier institution and standard bearer for professional military education. Thank you. The Naval War College Foundation is proud to support the U.S. Naval War College, our only client, and its mission to deliver excellence in education and research, and remains committed to providing the critical resources needed to advance its priorities of research and scholarship, curriculum and instruction, endowment and endowed chairs, capital improvements, faculty and student academic achievement awards, conferences and symposia, and regional studies. Tonight's presentation is an example of the scholarly work U.S. Naval War College students are immersed in during their 10-month academic year at the college, whose mission it is to educate and develop future military and civilian leaders of our nation and the world. As a matter of protocol, should you have a question come to you during the presentation, please submit it via the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to present it to our guest speaker during the Q&A session. We plan to address as many questions as time permits. Since the spring of 2020, we've been bringing Newport Lecture Series presentations and many other events hosted by the Foundation to you virtually. An added benefit of operating in this virtual environment, which has become rather routine, courtesy of COVID-19, is the opportunity it presents to interact with and, in some cases, reconnect with many of our members and friends from across the country and around the world. We plan to continue these lectures virtually for the foreseeable future, but look forward to coming together in the near future in person at the college or Naval Station Officers Club or other venue nationally when appropriate. Now to introduce and welcome your distinguished guest speaker for tonight's presentation. Dr. Yvonne Masakowski has a distinguished 27-year career with the U.S. Navy. Prior to her retirement, she served as a professor at the U.S. Naval War College in the College of Leadership and Ethics. She also served as the head Human Factors Advanced Concepts Division at the Naval Undersea Warfare Center prior to joining the faculty of the Naval War College. Dr. Masakowski has taught executive development to U.S. Navy admirals and Navy attorneys, graduate courses in leader development, ethics, cultural competence, as well as the humanities and war at the Naval War College. She also served as an advisor in the Naval War College's Ethics and Emerging Military Technologies graduate certificate program, wherein she mentored military graduate student dissertations focused on the influence and impact of advances in artificial intelligence and autonomous systems on the individual, society, and the future military operational environment. She has recently been appointed as a principal scientist by the NATO Innovation Hub, Norfolk, Virginia, with a research focus in cognitive warfare. The NATO Innovation Hub is part of the NATO Supreme Allied Command Transformation Command in Norfolk, Virginia. Dr. Masakowski's career includes serving as an associate director, Human Factors at the Office of Naval Research, Global London, as a scientist at NATO Center for Maritime Research and Experimentation, Italy, and as the chair of the NATO Human Factors and Medicine Research Task Group 286. She also was a CNO Senior Science Advisor for the CNO Strategic Studies Group, serving from 2003 to 2005 under Admiral James R. Hogg, United States Navy, retired. Dr. Masakowski has a Ph.D. in psychology, MA in philosophy, a second MA in psychology, and is a graduate of MIT Seminar 21, Foreign Policy and National Security. She is the author of numerous publications. Her most recent book, Artificial Intelligence and Global Security, Future Trends, Threats, and Considerations, was released by Emerald Publishing in the UK. She is the recipient of numerous science and technology awards, including the Czech Republic's highest Medal of Honor, the Cross of Merit, and medals from France and Poland for scientific achievement. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please give a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Yvonne Masakowski.
Thank you very much, George. And I'd like to thank everyone, the foundation, management and chair, and to thank the Naval War College for the opportunity to return home, as it were, to be here in my old homestead. So it's with some nostalgia, I'm back in place here. It's a privilege to be here to talk with you about a topic I think is very important and quite relevant as evidence to recent events in Russia and the Ukraine in recent days. So the topic is cognitive warfare in the 21st century and its influence, if you want to call it that, with artificial intelligence and how it's impacting the human domain. So with that, I would like to proceed first with my disclaimer. As you know, whenever we give a presentation, we have to make sure you understand that this is our personal views. Although I'm affiliated with NATO at this time, this represents my personal perspective on cognitive warfare and does not represent the US Navy, US Naval War College, the US Department of Defense, NATO, or the US government. So it's my personal research views, if you want to call it that. As George alluded to, there is a book in terms of how this was prescient in looking at the relationship between AI and global security and the fact that there is this cognitive link to it and how it's being weaponized. I'm just brief outline of the presentation in terms of I will work on developing this concept of cognitive warfare so that you understand it, but keep in mind it's an evolving dynamic environment. And so definitions are always forthcoming from whichever arena, and it means something different to different people. We will discuss what the role of AI and machine learning technology plays in cognitive warfare and what are the trajectories in this and considerations we should have and raising awareness of what cognitive warfare is and how we can recognize it and how it's impacting us. We'll look at examining methods and recommendations for countering cognitive warfare, and I'll draw some conclusions and make some recommendations that will foster some thought. And I'd ask that you put your thinking caps on. So do ask good questions because I want to collect those questions. I'd like to be able to answer some of them. I'm sure they'll lead to further research. I'm part of the, as George was saying, I've been working with the NATO Innovation Hub in Norfolk, Virginia, and it is innovative in that we're looking at the influence of emerging disruptive technologies across the board within this cognitive warfare arena. We've been having a series of workshops, and in addition, NATO, the Science Technology Organization in Paris, in affiliation with the Office of Naval Research in Washington, has stepped forward and said we have a research task group under NATO that has been formed to address cognitive warfare, looking at what are the technological gaps that we have, what can we invest in developing to counter these potential threats. So cognitive warfare, one of the definitions I'll put forward is it represents maneuvers in the cognitive domain to establish a predetermined perception among a target audience in order to gain advantage over another party. Now, cognitive warfare is different than information operations and PSYOPs, and I'll describe that a bit further. But keep in mind, the advances in AI and machine learning technologies, and I'll keep using the acronym AI/ML, are enablers that extend this warfare globally. Its objectives include targeting and influencing and shaping individual perspectives as well as group beliefs. So it has a mass conceptualization effect, and it impacts and shapes the way people think and how and what they do in response to these thoughts. So how do they behave? So it can incite and inspire, influence and shape. It sets the conditions to shape the global security environment. And its target is trust in the information, trust in each other, trust between nations. This is a huge problem. It constrains and manipulates information, and it gives a new quiver, if you want to call it, in the adversary's capabilities. When we think about the longbow and how it transformed warfare, this is a new kind of weapon. It's a new way of weaponizing things. And it shapes the outcomes too by weakening relationships among allied partners. How do you trust? How do you work together? How do you run exercises where you learn each other's capabilities and learn to understand each other's capabilities and how best to use them? So again, it's directed by adversaries to their gain, and we're going to speak to that again. So China's defined cognitive warfare. There's a lot of information you can get that's freedom of information. You can see it out there. in terms of shaping and controlling the enemy's cognitive thinking and decision-making. And it's very deliberate because scientists around the world and researchers who are doing brain science know full well how to target specific parts of the brain and how to deliver a message that gets incorporated into your mental lexicon and understanding of what the situation is. So a colleague of mine, friend James Giordano, has said the brain is the battle space of the 21st century. And indeed, I totally agree with this. And you'll see in this talk how this can play out in the warfare, not just in today's current events, but how it's going to perform in the future. It's an invasive, insidious, and invisible threat embedded deep within the layers of AI and machine learning algorithms. It transforms our understanding and interpretation and sense-making and has an influence that starts with the individual and is disseminated throughout the mass consciousness. It impacts our interpretation across all dimensions. Recently, we saw in the last 10 days, I'd say, play out in front of us the impact and influence of cognitive warfare. Every news broadcasting network on Sunday morning news, I don't care which channel you watched or which network you attuned to, you were seeing every journalist trying to get at what is the motivation, what is the adversary's intent, what is Russia trying to accomplish in this day. The influence campaign that was set forth before this exercise, the exercises that were planned was long before this. So there was intent there. So every journalist was trying to get that answer. What's the end game in setting these conditions? Another enabler of this is the hyperconnectivity of networks. And one might say, well, that's cyber warfare. What makes that difference? Well, that was more episodic and event controlled for exercising lethal and kinetic effects in the battlefield. This is a significant single continuous effort that's intended to disrupt and deny cognitive conditions. In other words, impact how we all perceive what's really going on here, whether they're events in our nation or across the globe. The human domain, some say, has been proposed as the sixth operational environment. So air, sea, land, space, undersea, and the human domain becomes the new vulnerable target. There's a lot of information that serves as evidence to support that. So this is a new kind of combat in the cognitive domain, in that it will attack society's reasoning as well as tap into our emotions, our beliefs, our historical beliefs, our cultural traditions, and it'll influence societal reasoning and relationships as well. For the adversary sets forth the conditions to shape our perspectives, to shape our understanding of them with their strategic investments as objectives in mind. So advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning technology facilitate the opportunities for adversaries to conduct cognitive warfare along all dimensions. It evolves as an extension of information and warfare and psyops, but it is so much more. It's weaponizing the AI technology, and trust is the target. When we think about deciphering the differences between psyops and information ops, we have to be reminded that with an understanding of the science of brain functionality, we can exploit cognitive biases. Now, we have cognitive biases because it helps us as humans not endure sensory overload. So there are ways of drawing your attention to a certain topic, tied to some link to some strong emotion, whether pretend for a moment you're watching the news on January 6th and you're seeing people rush to the Capitol. How did you interpret that information? Did you see patriots? Did you see some sort of chaos? Your understanding of events is shaped and transformed and interpreted based on the exploitation of cognitive biases. It's a very powerful tool and has been used to undermine our democracy. And that's the primary objective is, for example, with China is to, and Russia have both proclaimed they want to have global supremacy. So what are the strategies? I'll just focus on China for the moment. They have three warfare areas that represent most of their political warfare: public opinion, psychological warfare, and legal warfare. From their perspective, it's meant to influence the perceptions of the target, control the narratives, and impose one's versions of the facts. We'll get back to this point. Objectives, again, one of the powerful points of this messaging is that it taps into emotions and mindsets. It fragments groups. It can also be used to leverage extremist groups' agendas and say, how do I thread in and integrate in that tapestry the beliefs of the adversaries that they want to achieve some strategic objective. Perhaps it's dissent and separate civilians from the trust with their government and their military. Maybe it's to reduce the political will to resist the intentions of the adversary. Perhaps it's to marginalize or delegitimize opponents, that you shape the perception in the direction you wanted to go to achieve those ends. Weakening democracy by fragmenting groups is a very powerful tool. Advances in AI and ML technologies are continuing, and we have a corporate agenda in this country to succeed. The natural inclinations for corporations to want to increase their margin of profit. Advances in science are going to move us forward when we combine the advances in artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies with advances in brain science and neuro SNT and neuroweapons and genetics, et cetera. We are entering a whole new era of warfare. There are opportunities here that will be provided by the design of systems that combine these integrated capabilities, and they will be exploited by our adversaries. So we should have an alert going off saying, always think about how it can be used against us. In the case of China and Russia, saying that they perceive, and they have stated, AI technological superiority is the key to achieving global supremacy. President Xi has even stated science and technology is a national weapon, and they seek to achieve a supremacy in this regard. And to that end, they've taken the approach of moving across all domains, whether it's political, education, military, societal, cultural. They've done direct and indirect investments to shape that environment, to make sure they have a footprint, a global footprint around the globe, where energy and materials and resources are at stake, to ensure that they have the energy for future for themselves and complete access for military operations, air, sea, undersea, land, and space. So the technologies we have been developing, we have to be cognizant of what are the ultimate goals in which these things can be used. And so we have to be cognitively aware. To achieve global supremacy, we look at each of these domains. I'm focusing on the technological, but certainly there's a linkage between technological, military, and economic superiority. These are linked. And indeed, in this very facility I'm presenting from, the Naval War College, in 1897, Teddy Roosevelt, who was then the Secretary of the Navy, made a speech in which he said, "The Navy will have global reach. We will achieve military might. We will extend our economic supremacy." I'm not quoting him exactly, but you can Google that speech and you can see the impact that had. That set forth the plan that got us to the position of being #1 in the world. This is a reasonable strategy that both these nations, Russia, China, and others are trying to achieve. However, we have to be cognizant of not putting ourselves at risk at the cost of facilitating global cooperation. We have to be very cognizant of maintaining national defense strategy and our global defense strategy with our partners. So the posture that China is taking is that every technology they develop is dual use. They call it civ-mils fusion. But dual use means that any technology that's developed within our borders is fair game to be militarized. And be wary of the fact that this may provide an opportunity to serve as a potential weapon, not just against us, but about our NATO and our nations and allied partners. They seek to gain the innovation advantage by investing in joint ventures, in startup companies, in innovators, fostering innovation within the university environment and research with large donations, and also a campaign of goodwill where they're rebranding their positive image. For example, during COVID, they were offering to provide respirators and PPE to hospitals around the globe. So adversaries may view technological superiority as the key to achieving and reshaping that landscape. We don't need to have that first shot across the bow. There are no boundaries here. There are no restrictions. We have to think about setting them ourselves. Adversaries are going to exploit the vulnerabilities in the technologies, and here I'm focused on AI and design and machine learning. They will weaponize this and look at poisoning the databases, and I'll speak to that a little bit further. The cognitive warfare looks at the sphere of interest and influence in which these activities are taken to accomplish missions, and not just military missions. It's whatever mission it is. in order to achieve that global desired effect. So cognitive warfare exploits any technological advances, in this case, the IML, facilitates shaping the messaging within a complex, inaccessible, deep layered AIML network. It's invisible, it's insidious. It's enabling the targeting, specific targeting of human attention of individuals of the human cognitive brain functions. And this influence is deadly in that it comes into us in subtle ways, and it's aligned with adversarial intent aimed at achieving their desired strategic outcomes. So again, we see this in a different light. We're turning the lens around and saying there are a lot of advances that are beneficial with AI technologies, but we have to also perceive it can be used as a weapon and as an invisible threat against us. So we want to think about what are the biggest threats coming, emerging threats? And I'm here to tell you, I believe, and others have said, that data poisoning. And what does that mean? That means I take a data set from an uncertified source, and I use that to be the training data set for developing machine learning algorithms. And once that data set is poisoned and it gets into the network, it spreads. It's like a virus. So we need tools that are going to ensure that there is this threat detection, that there's a trust measure, that we can certify the sources of data sets and validate the provenance of these data sets before they're put into our networks, especially networks that involve weapons. We have to think about how they're going to be used with autonomous systems. We don't want them overtaken by adversaries in the battle space. Again, we have to think about how our development and our innovation might be supporting the adversary's strategic objectives to attain global supremacy. I divided these in terms of first order effects and second and third order effects. In first order effects, we look at targeting trust and what are the implications of this. Now, we're seeing play out on the field today in the news media, the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine, and the messaging that's shaped every other day, depending on what they're trying to spin to justify actions taken. But there's also the issue of breaching trust within our civilian populations, within our nations, in order to threaten democracy and weaken it. And this is one of the targeted areas, and we have to be cognizant of that too. Conducting campaigns of misinformation and disinformation are intended to disrupt, but they're also meant to have citizens lose confidence in their government. And by that, you lose the political will. And by that, one of the results is that reduction in losing the political will. You're less likely to forge a cohesive societal cohesion, a stronger cohesion among your population. Think back to 9/11, how every American felt like, I'm an American today. You watched the towers go down, you watched every American come forward and try to help the civilian population. There wasn't the division that there is today. So you have to look at the nuances of how this is spreading and how insidious this is, and it's powerful. During the Cold War, Russia used psychological warfare to shape thinking, and today they're using cognitive warfare to achieve their strategic objectives. They shape the news, they create fake news, they send messaging, they make one stated claim and behave in another way. So it's the intended line of attack on getting their strategic objectives. There is no sacrosanct area. We have to be the thinking individuals Americans are known for. We have to be independent thinkers and develop critical thinking skills and say, how do I evaluate this? What are my hypotheses and how am I testing the validity of this information? So shaping of nations and relationships, this is not a trivial thing. When you look to China and their surveillance and digital scorings methods for controlling population, they're a central command organization. The Communist Party wants everybody to comply. Well, how did this surveillance and facial recognition stuff impact them? Well, it was about making sure the society itself was safe, free of criminal activity. So that was a justification to have unity and have the surveillance systems and cameras put every place so they could have facial recognition as a means of providing a safe environment. And digital scoring was social scoring came about because, well, we want to ensure you have a quality of life. You have access to the highest medical care, educational opportunities, and jobs. And in fact, they track your relationships, your opinions, your behaviors. And if you're compliant in their society with their Communist Party policies and they're ensured, then you have more opportunity for yourself and your family and your progeny. So if you're not, and you're an independent thinker and you insist on freedom of speech and freedom of access, you remove the outliers from society because you want that homogeneous environment in which everybody's thinking alike and behaving in accordance with the National Communist Party politics. What's wrong with this picture? Well, what's wrong with this picture is that we flourish as human beings with the ability to think and be creative and be curious and to exert some autonomy in what we make of ourselves. This oppresses that. It oppresses, and it's the mix of, in America, we're very fortunate and blessed by the fact that we had so many immigrants here with so many different talents and so many different capabilities that it enriched the environment. We learned from each other, we helped each other, and we made a country that the world looked to for having that independence. It began with our Declaration of Independence, and I'd say we really have to remind ourselves of what that ensured us, the freedom of speech and freedom of thought, freedom to be creative and be successful for us today and for the future. This is something worth defending. Autocratic nations use technologies to achieve total control of information access and control its population. In the history today, you can't find a record of Tiananmen Square in China. Their youth probably are not aware that it even happened. Excuse me. And it's a means of providing a history that matches the Communist Party agenda. In democratic nations, we take the other view. We say we want to have information freedom available to all to ensure democracy. We want open access. We want us to be creative. We want us to be collaborative. We want us to move forward as innovators. Dramatic difference. So the Chinese approach to this in developing global supremacy is looking at developing partnerships. And that goes across all barriers, as I said, corporations, small business ventures, academic institutions, especially elevated ones like the Oxfords and the Yales and the Harvards and the MITs, where innovation can occur. It also fosters investment in looking at science and technology research to achieve technological dominance. Again, can I remind you that in China's perspective, all technologies are dual use. All technologies will be absorbed into their military armament. The idea of gaining control of resources and capabilities and bootstrapping, think back, we invented semiconductor chips here in the United States. We offloaded it from here to other countries so that they can reduce production labor costs. However, Taiwan has the expertise leadership on this. And so that's part of the capability that China wants to get. So again, go back to what was their initial statement. Well, we want global supremacy, and AI capability is the ticket to get there. That's the key. So this is part of what they're trying to absorb. Not only that, they try to take the market on any materials and resources, minerals that they can foster, whether it's on their land or throughout the world. So that's another step in another quiver in their weapon arsenal. So we look to how they're investing across the world, not just in academia and in resources, but in goodwill. What are they doing if they're helping in education in a foreign country, if they're providing medical assistance in some way? There's a philosophical dissemination of information that says, hey, these are not adversaries. They're actually good. They're the good guys. They're fostering the development of friendships too early on in institutions that are known for developing future leaders, places like Yale and Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge. This is a wise investment because they do take the long view. America, we have a tradition of being a bottom line up front and how do I get the profits today? I think our views are a little bit shorter. China and Russia, again, are focused on this dual use commercial development, and we have a lot of technology transfer programs. And we have to think about, again, how these might be weaponized and maybe a potential threat to us in the future. Among these programs, we've already seen advances in the military. We've seen advances that combine brain research and neuroscience with the capabilities that are used for augmenting cognitive perceptual capabilities, and as well as enhancing endurance, strength, and attention. But I want to draw to your attention the idea of designing the future, designing the child, as well as designing the warrior. Today, we know that there are Chinese researchers who are doing the design of genetically tailored humans using the gene editing tool CRISPR. It makes it easy to genetically modify embryos before they're transferred to women's uteruses. And I used to do human fetal research when I was a PhD student. So this really resonated with me. And I thought about all the women that I had seen over my course of my studies who had medical issues in their pregnancies. And I thought about, yeah, there are ethical concerns and there are institutional review boards that don't allow us to do that kind of research here in this country. But would you want to edit your child's genetic makeup if you could prevent an illness or disability from developing? Well, more to the point, methods and techniques that are going to come out of this they will have an application for the military, and that will be in the design of the future warrior who has no sociopathic restraint, who has no ethical values, that they will behave as automatons. That's the potential there. That's the relationship between these two. Keep in mind, they have stated everything has dual use. So it's not just gene editing tools for making life better and making sure children are born with preventing illnesses, but rather where can we take this? And from my point of view, there are no limits. They don't have institutional review boards or ethics boards that restrict them. So I'm calling for a time for an AI enigma-like defense system. There's a race for this AI technological superiority that's going to influence global security in a big way. And we have unrestricted exploitation of social networks, data platforms, big data breaches all over the world. And there are lots of vulnerabilities that we have to think about. And right now, as I said, NATO, we're standing up a group to study those vulnerabilities and say, what technologies could we develop? What S&T programs can we come up with that will fill the gaps? So cognitive security, from my point of view, is national security. We need it to defend across all domains. And I mean for civilian and military, because you can imagine the breaches in hospitals, medical records, education, banking, commerce, corporate business plans. I mean, it just has no end. So in developing this tool, the first step we have to understand in cognitive warfare is what is the adversary's intent? As I said, all weekend, the news broadcasts for what is going on here, what is the motivation, what's the end game? We have to build technological resilience by building the threat detection and deterrence system embedded along with the trust analytics within the AI network of algorithms. We have to evaluate the strategies of what's being done and build the resilience. As I said, NATO has required in their Article 3 established principle of resilience that all alliance members have to maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. This includes cognitive warfare. So how to do that technological resilience within the AI, adaptive AI networks that can be responsive and can morph in some way to defend and detect and deter and mitigate the risk associated with these threats is really important. Also building in intrinsic alerts so we have advanced warning. There's the decision cycle has to be accelerated here in order to deter the threats and to come to some consequence that defends those systems. So adversarial data poisoning attacks is an emerging threat that we have to also include in our plans for developing future systems, whether it's for the submarine platform or the surface platform or our drone system. Data poisoning can have a really long-reaching consequence on a global level that can be a global security threat. Again, I won't spend the time talking about each of these. I believe the slides will be available for review when the presentation goes into recording. But the need for forensic analytical tools that are built into the systems will also provide opportunities and vulnerabilities to be exploited that we can't even anticipate. I can't anticipate this moment, but there's always an opportunity for everything you come forward with in design. There's always a new way to turn it around. So we have to have that kind of, red teaming of what are those capabilities and what are the risks associated with them. So I want you to think for the future for a moment, put your mind in the future so that if we could cure Alzheimer's, we could cure Parkinson's disease or cerebral palsy or multiple sclerosis, whatever illness. You may have a loved one that has one of these illnesses, and you say, well, of course, I'd want to have some sort of mitigation. And if it could be pharmacological or a brain interface, would you do that? And then take that a step further. Imagine equipping each soldier with a brain interface that can be reconfigurable. This sounds very Matrix-like, I know. But at the same time, Is it doable? Is it feasible? And will people do it? Well, I don't think we'll be the first to do it, but I do think other countries are already thinking this way, that you can put together an brain interface that the individual soldier can command a fleet of unmanned autonomous air vehicles that are weaponized. Why not? Why couldn't you do that? Ultimate control of societies. So if we control the population and we have everybody feel that we're in a safe, highly surveilled area, everything is secure, and everybody's in line as they are in China, do we have an ultimate control of society that says there will be no war? I think conflict is always inevitable because the human spirit seeks to strive and overcome obstacles. If we were to be individuals and creative, independent thinker, we wish to shape our future and control our own destiny. So I'm bringing to your attention the fact that I think we need to develop these, give careful thought to how to develop these self-defense network systems, adaptive systems, develop integrative defensive technologies to address the future gaps that we're going to be facing in cognitive warfare. We need to define and develop stronger national security regulations that restrict technology transfer to potential adversaries that threaten our national security. It is not sufficient to say, oh, well, they're going to just use it for commercial application or an educational application. No, we have to think about, go back to the old days of, this is a government program and that information must remain secure. We have to think about developing the adaptive network center certification standards to ensure and preserve the integrity of our data sets, especially in the military defense. Red team negative scenarios, both real-time and virtual, to test out the impact of different approaches to cognitive warfare across all those integrated domains I mentioned previously, the brain research, the neuroscience, and look at what will be the gap analysis of that in today's world global security environment and that of one in the future. Having worked in the SSG, future concepting is always part of my bailiwick. So I always think out 20, 30 years, where is this going to go? Conduct that gap analysis to ensure the security of AAML networks and algorithms, and mind the technology gap because it's closing. And we have to incentivize science and technology research initiatives to address these threats, and invest in the multidisciplinary research regarding the integration of these capabilities to assess their placement in the horizon of future battle space. And look at developing or invest in developing an X Prize that does a competition for cognitive warfare defense technologies in the same way that we did for augmented technologies, science and technologies that would augment the individual warfighter. So let us not invite the partner to an adversary to partner with the design and development of military technologies. Remember, the Manhattan Project and the Enigma military defense programs were secret for a reason. Thank you for your attention. I welcome your questions, and over to you, George. I hope George is there. Yes.
I am. 1 second. I'm lost in my Q&A windows right now, so I apologize. Overwhelming responses so far and some very thoughtful questions. This is the point where I get to thank you, Dr. Masakowski, for a thoughtful presentation and remarks, but really all I say is wow. that was a terrific presentation, and
thanks, George.
And I thank you for that. And I know you have the Naval War College's College of Leadership and Ethics Dean with you, Peg Klein. So it's nice to see you, Admiral Klein. And really, at this point, I think we've got a number of questions. And normally I sometimes kick off it with a question to get kind of the juices flowing, but I don't think I need to do that tonight. So with that said, I will just jump right into the first question. And I will remind others on the that if you have a question, please submit it via the Q&A box, and certainly we'll try to get through as many as we can as time permits. We've got about 20 minutes. I need a minute or two of wrap-up questions, or wrap-up statement, or comments rather. But we'll try to get after some of these questions that are in the house. So the first question, Dr. Masakowski, from Cornelia Weiss: what are the ethics of cognitive warfare?
Boy, that's a great question. I guess it would depend. That's culturally dependent, because there are differences across cultures. So let's take the American perspective, okay? So in a way, I'd say the American perspective is we don't wish to do harm. We just wish to defend ourselves against being hurt, if you want to call it that. So I would say we look at it from a defensive perspective. So what are the ethics in designing systems that would help us defend against cognitive attacks? And I think that's the best answer. I think we have institutional review boards in this country for a reason, which I can talk to, as Admiral Klein can speak to. We've talked about this issue for hours, but they're intended to defend and protect the human. So I think about cognitive warfare from the US perspective as a defensive measure, S&T program. How do we defend against adversaries using it in the offensive manner? Thank you. That was a great question.
Yeah, thank you. And a follow-up from Cornelia: can cognitive warfare be addressed through the laws of armed conflict and/or human rights law?
Well, I'm not an attorney, so that's an attorney type of question. So I think more from my point of view, again, I'm a psychologist, so I'll take it from the human perspective as opposed to the legal perspective. I'll let the lawyers argue about where it turns into war and let them make that decision. I know that there are documents out there and articles in law about cyberspace. So that's where I would see this leaning toward. But from the human perspective, human violations, when does a human become violated? I think that's something that a board has to be stood up to decide and determine at which point does this become a real direct assault. The closest I think I can come to answering that in a real term is the directed energy attacks on Cuban embassy of American personnel who had experienced these directed energy attacks on their brain. Again, that's a direct cognitive attack. That's the sort of thing Dr. Giordano would speak to in great detail. So that's the best I would answer that question. Thank you.
No, very, very good. And then really a question that came to my mind, what are counter strategies to these approaches?
Well, as I think I put up a few of them, I think that the countering is first step, acknowledging that it's happening. I think there are a lot of people are in denial. They think that it's their understanding of the world is the only view of the world. So they don't want to consider other possibilities may be happening. There may be malicious, malevolent information embedded in social networks that shape them and come out and are revealed, whatever ideas come out in whatever network you assign to, whether it's a Facebook. I'm not slamming any of these platforms because that's sort of the grandmother's territory for sharing photographs. But at the same time, those platforms that are used for spreading and disseminating information also shape people's thinking. And then, as I think I had in there in one of my slides about leveraging extremist objectives and saying, if I can align them closely with the adversary's objective, that's the national threat you have to think about. And it's intended consequences to weaken democracy, weaken relationship, weaken the trust of citizens of their government. And that weakens democracy and political will. Does that answer the question, George?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I appreciate that. From Glen Verona, good evening, Dr. Masakowski. I am part of an Australian defense study on the impact of information distortion on Australia's social cohesion and its implications on defense and security.
Welcome to cognitive warfare. That's all I got to say. Join our team.
In your view, would cognitive warfare be more effective in places where weak states are surrounded by strong societies, or strong states surrounded by weak societies?
Well, that's a tricky one because it really relies on access to information, doesn't it? So if I'm a small country and I don't have access to information, how am I influenced? So, it really depends. It depends on, do I have access to education? Do I have access to other opinions, or is it one party line? Am I living in an island in the South China Sea and I don't have internet impact? I still think that I have faith in the independent thinking person to seek out information, to be curious enough to find out, is this the truth of information, to look for other sources. So, I hearken to the fact that this is a research dissertation topic, that we need more information done on this cognitive warfare topic. So I can tell you that this is the purpose of standing up this cognitive warfare research task group by NATO.
Yeah, no, very, very good. From Lamont Wells, would you describe Russia's, specifically President Putin's, use of cognitive warfare against the US and NATO in its strategic positioning of forces along the border and its engagement against Ukraine as an effective instrument of war? Does its use of cognitive warfare better position Russia to achieve its end game, its desired outcome?
Well, if you listen to the news broadcasts on Sunday, the pronounced end game as was presented was not represented by the information campaign that occurred. I mean, there was a disconnect there, wasn't there? And that's evidenced by what's happening with the troops today. Every day it's a new event and every day it's a different message. So can I say, did he purposely say, I want to conduct cognitive warfare? I'm not sure I know that he knows what we call that. we may not agree on the definition. Did he have a strategy? Well, this exercise was planned, as I understand it, planned a year ago. So two nations are exercising across the border at a very strategic border. And there's an end game that they have in mind, but what is it is the big question for all the network journalists, and they're still debating it from my point of view. So I don't think I'm smart enough to answer that question completely. I'm not in their minds.
Yeah, no.
If you're asking my perspective, have they conducted cognitive warfare? I'd say sure, yes.
Right, right. From Kyle Krieg, a joint all-domain command and control imagines a cloud network of C5I SRT data for shooters and decision makers to integrate fires and understand the whole battle space. How do you see traditional human commanders and staffs able to manage the integration of AI into this process while managing things like trust, culture, and normal accident risk?
Very tricky because, as I said, if you get data poisoning into that network at the outset, you're trying to act. Let's just take the good scenario. The data is perfect. It's disseminated in a global surveillance system that has all the nuts and bolts of it. And that the commander gets recommendations from the AI, the trusted AI agent, if you will, who gives it several options to choose from. And then they may test that within the context of potential outcomes that they want to desire, their desired end result outcomes. That's the best scenario. But let's just take reality. Let's take the fact that we can anticipate vulnerabilities. We can anticipate that somewhere in the design, there'll be an opportunity for a malevolent agent system to get in there, or data points or poison data that disseminates throughout the system and skews the information and changes the probabilities. Think about it mathematically. Every single element and factor within that regression analysis can have a weighting to it. And I can influence that weighting and I can skew it. I can put it in favor of the adversary's intended outcome. And that system then makes the recommendation that should not be accepted. It's erroneous. Now, this is a complicated thing because that's why rehearsing and exercising is so important for the military. You have to test the system's validity and reliability. And you have to have, in an exercise, you would have the benefit of running it against a model of what would be expected versus what's happening. And then you build up your database of those anticipated consequences and compare that. Does that seem reasonable? Decision-making is very complicated business because there's lots of elements that go into it, as well as the individual's mindset of what are factors, what's my training, what do I know about this particular domain? So that's a complicated question. That would take years to test out, but that's my perspective on it. That makes sense to you, George?
Thank you. Thank you. From Mark Wallenweber, what are the ethical legal limits on our military and government using algorithm countermeasures to China and Russia in our domestic news and social media markets?
Well, I can't speak to the legal. Again, I'm not an attorney, and I don't think there's anything written down from the cognitive warfare group, if you want to call it that body of work that's being done. So that becomes a bigger question for the designers of the technologies themselves. That's an intellectual property rights thing that they make at negotiations of what they will allow or not allow. And that's like taking Facebook into China or one of those platforms into China saying, to what extent do we allow Tiananmen Square to be searched in the Google search engine in China? So we see this existing today. That's not a surprise, but I can't speak to the legal plans for the future.
Understand. From Greg Hawkins, what's a known example of a poisoned database or data set?
Well, think about 2016 elections. There was a lot of consternation about not just the election here, the election in Canada and France, elections around the world, Germany. Where was data? And it was revealed post, probably took 2 years for people to search that out in terms of poisoning the system with misinformation. And that was done with algorithms. Now, so there is evidence-based, and there, I think the Ukraine had a bank attack, an economic attack. So again, in the cyber domain, there's that impact that it influences the people in terms of their response. If all of a sudden you go to the bank and all of your money is gone, you're going to have a reaction. There's an emotional reaction. You lose faith in your bank. You lose faith in your government for protecting your funds. So I think there is concrete evidence of that type of thing that has the disseminating factor. And as I said, the recent events, all you have to do is pick up the news every single day. There was a new rationale of what was happening in the Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia in terms of what the perspective shaping was going to be versus the stated objective of Russia and the news media.
No. Thank you again. And I'm trying to get through as many questions. They keep coming in. So
and I keep trying to talk as fast as I can.
No, well, very good. From Victor Sussman, if freedom of expression and creativity are a source of human flourishing, absence in authoritarian systems a weakness that could be exploited to counter CW efforts, cognitive warfare efforts. If freedom of expression and creativity are a source of human flourishing, are their absence in authoritarian systems a weakness that could be exploited to counter cognitive warfare efforts?
Well, I think it's more of a national policy kind of thing. First of all, China prohibits the information to come into their internet. Think about it's kind of an interesting kind of reverse cognitive warfare, if you will, then you raise the point. What information happened when we disseminated the information of the Beatles and the blue jeans to Russia? What happened? The population said they had a demand for that. They want to be westernized. So now in China, they don't want their people to be taken under the rules of democracy. So let's close that information. We're not going to allow you to see those ideas any more than you want you to see about Tiananmen Square ever happening. So we want everybody to seem like, hey, we're getting along great here. We're doing well. We're prospering. We're succeeding. So in a way, cognitive warfare is playing out in that way, in that we're shaping the perceptions of those people within that national policy of that government. So it does weaken the population and make them susceptible in being controlled in that environment, if you will. Does that make sense, George?
Yeah. It's I wish I can get Victor to say yes or no if that's his question.
Well, I'm trying my best.
No, very good. But from Victor again now, how do we balance the need to invest in AI, machine learning, cognitive warfare technologies against our views regarding the ethical conduct of war?
Well, I think as we said at the outset, we don't think about this offensively. It's not something we're going to use on the offense. I don't believe. I think we're going to have ethical boundaries in what we design, and we design things that defend from a national security perspective. We should be defending our networks. I mean, we should be defending the development of these silicon chips. We should be defending the design and know every property of what's going into it. It should not be a shared product. It should be something that's exclusive for military application and defense systems. And right now that is not, I don't think it's that way.
Right. From Joseph Troviani, can the use of psychological hardness training and mindfulness help to defend us? Well,
I think it's an interesting point. I think mindfulness training and being aware, I mean, it's sort of like when you get a phishing email are you mindful and aware? And you know, we get these calls, you know, somebody pretends to be your child, your grandchild has been, you know, held in jail in some place, send money. So I think it's raising the awareness is the first thing. So I think becoming mindful of the kind of spoofing that can go on. I think being mindful of the probabilities of something being the real strategy when the behavior is something entirely different. I think there's an incongruity there that we humans sort of see a disconnect in truth and reality, and truth from the information that's being used. You know, our brains are natural spectral Fourier analysis systems. We look to make sense in our environment, whether it's the lighting in the room or the truth in a document. We want to make sense of it. It's our natural inclination because that helps us make decisions about things and move forward. So I think that it's the human brain's capacity to slow down and pay attention to what's going on and process it in a way that challenges your thinking and say, could this be valid? Is this really happening? And I go back to January 6th saying we're trying to watch television and you're looking at chaos and going, what's happening? You're not, you know, you don't know what's happening. And from each person's perspective, they have a different experience. You have a car accident on a corner. There's witnesses on each corner watching that accident. Everybody has a unique perspective because you only see your frame. You're coming from within your brain and looking out into the world, and you process it differently.
Yeah, no, thank you. Oscar and G. Mark Whitehead kind of offer kind of statements, I guess, but G. Mark Whitehead actually said, this is what our current cult-like GOP is doing to destroy our democracy. I try to keep politics out of this, but what should the rest do, or how, or who should respond? I don't know if that's, if you've got some thoughts.
I'm not sure the question. You're asking how to respond to the disruption and chaos within the political system or within the democracy?
Yeah, within our democracy, I think is.
Well, I think everybody wants to be heard. Everyone has a perspective. I mean, don't we all want to be heard? Isn't that what democracy is about? We want to be heard. We want to be understood. Everybody has a perspective. And I think that's why we have so many news shows that spend hours and hours, you know, parsing what's really happening here.
Right, right. From Deborah Lyle, unethical adversaries will do anything, such as the effects of U.S. officials impacted negatively with the Havana syndrome, in lieu of human nature trying to overcome challenges, as you mentioned. What about power and the control in play here? What about power and control in play here?
Power and control in what?
So unethical adversaries will do anything such as the effects of U.S. officials impacted negatively with the Havana syndrome and human nature trying to overcome challenges. As you mentioned, what about power and control in play here? So it might be difficult to get to a point if it's quickly written.
Yeah, it's difficult to get my head around.
Yeah, we've only got 1 more minute, so let me just.
I don't want to spend time on that because I have to process that. I'm not clear on the question.
Right. Just from the last question, I think from Gary David. What should the role and opportunity of academics to engage in public scholarship on social media to counter the misinformation that is being propagated there?
Well, education is the great leveler. And getting more information and understanding of what's going on. I think that's what the news media tries to do. They try to educate and enlighten. But again, everybody has a bias. It's natural to have biases. So I think seeking the truth for yourself, understanding, look to a variety of sources to get at truth and what is reliable and valid for you. Again, sense making is our natural inclination. So I think education linked with seeking out information is a combination. Excellent
response. So thank you. Dr. Masakowski, an incredible evening. Thank you for that. A wonderful turnout, almost 150 participants.
Oh, that's great.
Great questions. It was truly an honor and a privilege to host you this evening to speak about an interesting and relevant topic. And we appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to spend it with us this evening.
My pleasure. Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes tonight's lecture. Our next presentation will be on Wednesday, March 23rd by Mr. Rob Doan and Ms. Maria Vasquez, who will speak to us about the American men and women who served in World War I. Updates to this presentation and others are posted on our webpage at nwcfoundation.org/our-events. Thank you for tuning in tonight and for your continued support for the missions of the Naval War College and Naval War College Foundation. The Naval War College Foundation board and staff continue to work hard to generate the resources and margin of excellence required by the college to educate and inform today's decision makers and tomorrow's leaders. Your support and very generous tax-deductible contributions are an investment in their learning and in our national security and position of leadership on the global stage. Thank you. As always, we seek to expand our membership and raise awareness of the great institution which is the Naval War College. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And if you're already a Naval War College Foundation member, but know of others who may like to learn more about the U.S. Naval War College and Foundation, please consider a gift of membership to those who may share your interests and concerns for our national security. You can contact my staff directly for assistance or simply visit our website and select membership. Thank you again and have a great rest of your evening and stay safe.
Thank you.